Hello and welcome to another episode in this mini-series looking at games and franchises that started out on a particular home computer, and today we're looking at the Atari ST, a computer that always lived somewhat in the shadow of the Amiga, but a computer that I also have many fond memories of playing at friends' houses. There are a lot of games that came to the Amiga and Atari ST at the same time, including some that I could have sworn started on the Amiga, but the ST got its fair share of firsts too. Some of these games were huge names in the 80s and 90s, so chances are that you have played some of them on one system or another, but you may be surprised to learn that they started out on the ST. KickOff was one of the most successful football games of the late 80s and early 90s. Created by Dino Dini, it was published by Anco in 1989. Although the Amiga and ST releases weren't far apart, it was originally created for the ST and was ported to the Amiga. In the late 80s and early 90s, it was common for football games to be played from a top-down perspective like this. KickOff predates the rise in popularity of football games viewed from a side-on or isometric perspective, like FIFA or the popular 90s arcade games like Super Sidekicks and Virtua Striker. KickOff did differ from previous football games in that the football didn't stick to your feet, although it was by no means the first game to employ this feature. It was the norm for the ball to be stuck to your player's feet with invisible glue until it was shot or passed, but in KickOff the player had to work to keep control of the ball. Although it's obviously still primitive as far as football games go, this was a welcome addition that added an extra layer of challenge and skill. KickOff also added several other features that made it more realistic than its contemporaries. Fouls would be met with yellow and red cards and would result in injured players and injury time being added at the end of the match. KickOff was a big deal at the time, and it was king of the football games until Sensible Soccer came along in 1992, but between you and me, I always preferred KickOff, and it all started on the Atari ST. KickOff was ported to the Amiga as I mentioned earlier, then to DOS, Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum and NES. KickOff was a runaway hit, receiving universally high scores among reviewers. Dino Dini's next game for Anco was Player Manager, which combined football management with gameplay using the KickOff engine for the latter. A sequel soon followed in 1990 called KickOff II, where the original had one expansion pack called KickOff Extra Time. KickOff 2 had around 9. An enhanced version called Super KickOff was also created for the Master System, Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, Game Boy and Game Gear, released in 1991. Dino Dini started working on KickOff 3 in 1992, but he ended up leaving Anco to work for Virgin, where he developed 1993's Goal for the Amiga ST and DOS, another well-received although less successful football game. And then Dino Dini's Soccer for the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo in 1994. Anco developed another version of KickOff 3 which was released in 94, then after a break there was KickOff 97, 98 and 2002. The franchise recently saw a comeback in 2016 with KickOff Revival, the first time Dino Dini had been involved with a released KickOff series game since KickOff 2, but it was widely regarded as a terrible game. Barbarian was developed for the Atari ST by Melbourne House and published by Psygnosis in 1987 using their signature Roger Dean artwork for the box. This is not to be confused with Barbarian the Ultimate Warrior from Palace Software, which also came to the ST but started on the Commodore 64. Barbarian is an action platformer. You play as a barbarian who must navigate a network of underground caverns and dungeons on a quest to defeat an evil sorcerer who also happens to be his brother. You have a sword and a bow at your disposal for attacks and a shield for defence, although that too can be used for attacks. There are various enemies to take on and a lot of traps. The graphics and sound were exceptional for 1987, but unfortunately where the game falls down is the ridiculous control scheme. You can move left and right easily, but to perform any kind of action you need to use the mouse to select the action on the command menu at the bottom. So yes, to attack, run or even jump you have to click on the relevant icon. Not fun. After originating on the Atari ST in 1987, Barbarian was ported to the Amiga the same year, then in '88 to DOS, Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, MSX and ZX Spectrum. Although Barbarian's graphics and sound were praised at the time for having some of the best graphics and sound the ST had ever seen, despite there being no in-game music, I'll probably overlay some other ST music over this one, it had no real lasting effect on the genre. A sequel, Barbarian II, was released in 1991 for the ST and Amiga. Xenon was the Bitmap Brothers' first game, first released for the Atari ST in 1988, published by Melbourne House. Although the Bitmap Brothers are well known for making quality Amiga games, a surprising number of them started out on the ST or were released for the Amiga and ST simultaneously. Its better known sequel, Xenon 2 Mega Blast, was one example. Xenon is a vertical shooter, but with a twist. As a ship, you fly vertically up the screen, shooting incoming enemies. Nothing unusual there, but you can also turn into a tank, shooting enemies on the ground. When you're flying the ship, movement is just left and right as you move up the screen, as per your typical vertical shooter, but when in the tank you can move and shoot in any direction. Enemies and turrets will be on the ground and higher up, so you'll need to utilise both modes of transport to take them all out. Downed enemies leave behind power-ups of course, including health top-ups, options and a variety of different weapons. Health is represented on the side as fuel. The display on the side also indicates various other aspects of your ship's status, and even displays the Bitmap Brothers to show you who developed the game, a trend which continued on with them as their publishing deals included the stipulation that their logo should be just as prominent as the publishers, and even the game title itself, reinforcing the notion that they were indeed the first Rockstar developers. Visually, the Atari ST original looks great, although it lags behind the Amiga in the sound department, as is usually the case. We can see even here in the Bitmap Brothers' first game their signature style coming through with those grey metal surfaces, and for 1988 it's very accomplished graphically. Sadly, it's very difficult and very short, having only 4 levels, but it was a good first game from the Bitmap Brothers and its quality put them on the map. Xenon was ported to the Amiga, DOS, ZX Spectrum, Amstrad CPC, MSX and Commodore 64, and even received an arcade port for Arcadia System's Super Select system. A very successful sequel, Xenon 2 Mega Blast, was released in 1989, which first came to the ST and Amiga and received several console ports. The subtitle Mega Blast came from a track by Bomb the Bass, which was one of the earliest instances of a popular track being used for a video game. Of course, it sounded far better on the Amiga than any of the other versions, Atari ST included. Switchblade was developed by Core Design, made up of ex-Gremlin employees, and was published by Gremlin in 1989. Visually, this has a lot in common with Rick Dangerous, and that's because they were both designed by Core Design's Simon Phipps. He actually worked on Switchblade in his spare time while he worked on other games. An action platformer, Switchblade stars Hero as he makes his way through underground rooms, fighting enemies and avoiding traps, again very much like Rick Dangerous. Heavily inspired by post-apocalyptic and dystopian films like Blade Runner and Akira, the story follows Hero as he searches for fragments of an ancient sword, which he needs to defeat an equally ancient evil. Hero can punch and kick enemies, as well as use several weapons found along the way. The game world is pretty big, and the graphics were inspired by Japanese anime, but sadly it's let down by a lack of variety and a repetitive colour palette. Still an enjoyable game, albeit rather clunky. Switchblade was ported to the Amiga later in 1989, and then the Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC and ZX Spectrum in 1991. In 1990 it received its only console port, an enhanced version for Amstrad's GX4000. Updated versions also came to the Atari Jaguar and Sega Genesis in 2019, courtesy of Pico Interactive, after a successful Kickstarter campaign, both of which can now be bought on their site. A sequel to Switchblade came in 1991, but this time it was released for the Amiga first, with an Atari ST port to follow, and then a version for the Atari Lynx. This sequel was vastly different from the original. It featured Hero as the main character and was set in similar underground facilities, but the graphics and colour were improved with larger sprites. Most notable was the change of pace, opting for a more action-oriented run-and-gun gameplay style. Last is another Bitmap Brothers game, and one of their finest, Speedball II. Where the original Speedball in 1988 was released simultaneously for the ST and Amiga, Speedball II, full title Speedball II Brutal Deluxe, was first released for the ST in 1990. Speedball 2 is the ultimate sci-fi dystopian sports game. It's sort of a violent, futuristic version of handball, with 2 teams of 9 players battling it out in an arena. The aim is to throw the ball into your opponent's goal, and you can earn bonus points by throwing the ball into various other targets in the arena. As the subtitle Brutal Deluxe suggests, which is actually the name of your Speedball team, Speedball 2 rewards brutality. Batter the opposing team's players enough and they'll run out of substitute players, forcing them to play on while injured. Throwing the ball into the goal isn't the only way to score points. There are targets on the walls to light up, a pinball-like shoot which acts as a score multiplier, and you can even earn points by incapacitating rival players. This adds a level of depth to the gameplay that was absent in the first game, with teams needing to strategise beyond merely throwing the ball into the opposing goal to win matches. There are also things in the arena that affect the ball, instantly transporting it somewhere else on the pitch or turning it red hot. When hot, the ball will travel straight through players, making an on-target goal unstoppable. Between matches you can spend cash on upgrading your players' stats and even execute transfers or spend big to draft in some very skilled players. The single player mode is very challenging with some exceptional AI, so amassing the best possible team is of paramount importance. There are a few game modes as well, but where Speedball 2 really becomes a timeless classic is in multiplayer. Taking on a friend in the bleak metal arena is still as fun today as it was back in 1990. Visually, it's quintessentially Bitmap Brothers, lots of metal and grey with a cyberpunk theme. The music and sound effects are top notch too, although there is no in-game music. Probably the most widely ported game on this list, Speedball 2 was ported to the Amiga, Acorn Archimedes, CD32, DOS, Commodore 64, Master System, Mega Drive, Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. Several updated versions came later, an enhanced version for Xbox Live Arcade in 2007, a remake called Speedball 2 Tournament for Steam in 2007, another Steam remake called Speedball 2 HD in 2013, and Speedball 2 Evolution in 2011 for iOS and the PSP and PS3 via the PlayStation Network. There was also a rather naff 3D version released for the original PlayStation in 2000 called Speedball 2100. Speedball 2 is highly regarded even to this day, particularly the Amiga version. It's one of the most well-loved futuristic sports games ever released, and at the time had an influence on not only similar games, but multiplayer sports games in general. So that was 5 games that originated on the Atari ST, perhaps some surprises there, and certainly some very well-known games and franchises from the 16-bit era. Are you a fan of any of these, and what are your memories of them? Did you play them on the ST, or like me, on the Amiga, or maybe on another computer or console? Let me know in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.